You ever walk down to your dock, coffee in one hand, peace in the other, and realize your boat's gone? Just vanished like it owed someone money? That was my Tuesday morning. I stood there blinking at the empty slip, thinking maybe I parked it wrong. That's how stunned I was, because my boat, the Salty Betty, never moved without me. She wasn't just fiberglass and fuel. She was the last thing my late wife and I built together before cancer pulled her out to sea for good. And now someone had stolen her like she was a toy left in the sandbox. I didn't panic. I don't do panic. I'm a retired Coast Guard captain, the kind of man who's had to steer vessels through hurricane swells while the radar blinked red like a ticking bomb. But staring at the place where my boat should have been, I felt something colder than seawater run down my spine. Not fear, rage. Silent, creeping rage. Someone had crossed a line, and this wasn't going to end in a polite HOA meeting. I turned around, and there she was, standing 3 docks over in a visor, neon tennis skirt, and an expression like she'd just invented. Electricity. Karen, president of our HOA, Lord Commander of Petty Citations. She saw me staring at the empty slip and raised her Starbucks cup like she was toasting my misery. I walked up the slope to her porch with a purpose, not even needing to speak before she said, "Oh," so sweetly I had it moved. "You were violating the shared dock rule, Rick." I stared at her for a second, genuinely speechless. Shared dock rule, Karen? That dock is on my property deed. It's literally drawn in the survey line. She shrugged, took another sip, and said, "The HOA voted. It's now considered community access." That boat was taking up space. I laugh. I actually laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was so far beyond stupid that my brain had nothing else to offer. She continued without flinching. "I arranged to have it docked at the yacht club across the cove. You can go pick it up, but don't bring it back here. We're re-landscaping and might pave that path for kayak storage." I had to walk away, not because I was scared of her, because I was 2 seconds away from launching her prized flamingo lawn ornament into the next zip code. Instead, I called the sheriff. Deputy Lou showed up an hour later, a guy I'd known since he was a pimply teenager working at the bait shop. I told him what happened. He listened, scratched his head, and finally said, "Well, Rick, I get it, but technically this is a civil issue. HOA property disputes usually go through mediation or court filings. She didn't sink your boat, she just moved it." I pointed at my dock. That is not HOA land. I have a survey from 1989 proving that. He nodded, but his tone stayed flat. "You got to go through county court to prove that." My hands are tied. I asked him if it would still be a civil issue if I moved her car from her driveway to the next county. He didn't laugh. I didn't either. So I filed a report just in case, but I wasn't done. I had a GPS beacon installed on the Salty Betty 2 years ago after a neighbor's boat was vandalized. I opened the app and pinged the signal. Sure enough, she was sitting in the private dock of Bayview's Yacht Club, a place with tight security, even tighter memberships, and absolutely zero tolerance for unauthorized dockings. I drove down that afternoon, flashed my ID, and the dockmaster let me through after some back and forth. There she was, my boat. Same paint job, same dent in the left guardrail, but someone had painted over her name in sloppy pink letters that said Queen K. I just stood there staring at it like I was in a bad dream. This woman didn't just steal my boat. She tried to rebrand it, rename it, like she'd earned it. I asked the dockmaster who signed her in. He pulled the form, Karen's name, claimed she was the new owner, handed over a fake bill of sale, written in Sharpie and photocopied on floral stationery. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I thanked the dockmaster and said I'd be back. I didn't tell him the boat was mine, not yet. I had a hunch that this wasn't about petty HOA games anymore. Karen had moved fast, too fast, and too bold, and people that confident usually have dirt under their nails. Back home, I installed a wildlife camera across from her house, up in the old oak tree near the dock. It was technically on my land, hidden well, motion triggered. I just wanted to see who else she was talking to. Within 2 nights, I got my answer. A man I didn't recognize pulled up around midnight, headlights off, and walked down to her dock. Karen came out wearing a hoodie and carrying a large cooler. They spoke for 3 minutes, exchanged the cooler for a small duffel bag, then he left. That's not HOA business. That's shady, and I know shady. I spent 26 years boarding vessels for contraband. That wasn't leftovers or frozen shrimp. That was a drop, and Karen was part of something. The next morning, I pulled out my old Coast Guard contact list, called a guy named Mitch, now with Homeland, told him the story. He laughed at first until I sent the footage. Then he stopped laughing. He told me to keep the camera rolling. Don't tip her off. Don't confront her again. She's on a list already, and if she makes one wrong move, they'll be ready. I hung up the phone with my heart pounding. What started as a stolen boat had just become something much bigger. Karen didn't just pick a fight with the wrong man, she picked a fight with the one guy who used to hunt people like her for a living, and this time, I had nothing but time, patience, and a whole lot of quiet payback waiting to dock. The next few days passed like slow tides crawling back from the shore, but my focus never wavered. I checked the camera footage every night, and each clip confirmed that Karen's dock had turned into a late-night exchange hub. Not every visit was suspicious, but enough were. Duffel bags, coolers, even a few unmarked crates being loaded onto that stolen boat she'd now claimed as her own. The boat I'd spent years perfecting. The woman wasn't just trespassing or squatting, she was actively running something that felt far dirtier than a petty HOA squabble. And the worst part? She strutted around the neighborhood like she was queen of the coastline, handing out citations for overgrown grass and garbage cans that sat out past pickup. What struck me most was how casual she was about it all. I spotted her one afternoon giving a dock tour to 2 women in business suits. I stood across the fence, trimming hedges that didn't need trimming, just to eavesdrop. She referred to the pier as our HOA Marina and told them it had become a shared community asset for elite members. Then she started talking about weekend boat rentals, exclusive networking cruises, and something called Sea Glass Club charters. One of the women asked if the club was licensed. Karen didn't blink. She smiled and said, "We operate under private agreements. It's all very discreet." I knew that line. I'd heard it before, usually from smugglers trying to talk their way past a Coast Guard boarding party. That night, I made a list. First item, dig into Sea Glass Club. Spoiler alert, it didn't exist. Not legally. No registry, no site, no tax ID. But it was all over her new social media page. See Queen Karen, pictures of her on my boat, captioned things like boat life and manifesting my luxury hustle. She was marketing it as some kind of boutique. Marina/luxury lifestyle scam, and people were buying into it. I even recognized one guy from town, a real estate agent, posing beside her like she was a successful entrepreneur. He had no clue the vessel under his feet had been stolen from the man who used to inspect naval contraband off cartel barges. I emailed the new footage and the fake business info to Mitch. He replied the next morning with 2 words, "Keep going." That was enough for me. Later that week, I drove past Bayview's Yacht Club again and noticed something new. Not only was my boat still there with its new tacky paint job, but another vessel had appeared. A sleek black old speedboat tied up behind the clubhouse, mostly under a tarp. The nameplate was taped over. That alone raised every red flag in my playbook. Boats without proper identification are like strangers without names. You can bet they're up to no good. So I played dumb. I visited the clubhouse bar and casually asked the bartender if the speedboat was a new members ride. He shook his head and said, "No clue, man. Been here 3 nights. Some lady dropped it off and said her cousin would pick it up." Sounded weird, but the guy seemed unfazed. In a marina like this, odd isn't always illegal. I didn't have jurisdiction anymore. I wasn't a cop. I was just a guy with a stolen boat and too much time. But what I did have was instincts. That second boat meant Karen wasn't just pretending to be a boat club CEO. She was operating multiple vessels, likely under fake paperwork, maybe moving things people paid not to ask about, which meant she wasn't just stupid and entitled, she was dangerous. That night, the camera caught another drop. This time, the same man from earlier visits handed Karen a sealed case the size of a small cooler. She opened it, took something out, and nodded. Then she walked back to her house holding what looked like a phone and a notebook. I enhanced the image and sent it to Mitch. He called me an hour later, not by email, but voice. That's when I knew it was serious. He said they had enough to elevate Karen from a watch list subject to an active investigation. That the case she was seen receiving matched the dimensions of equipment used in a case they'd been building, involving offshore crypto laundering, using mobile signal boosters and untraceable gear. Mitch said her location, the cash-based rentals, and the mystery speedboat all pointed to her being used as a mule or middleman in a larger network. Not the brains, but someone who wouldn't ask questions as long as the money rolled in and the HOA clout kept her untouchable. They weren't ready to make a move yet. They needed one more piece, a clean sting, ideally on my boat, to tie her directly to the transport of illegal goods, and they wanted me to help set it up. I'll admit, I hesitated. Not because I was afraid, but because if anything went wrong, she'd get away with it again, and I couldn't let that happen. Not just for me, but for every neighbor she'd find for mailbox color or patio light. This woman used rules like weapons and power like perfume, loud, fake, and choking. I agreed. The plan was simple. The FBI would prepare a decoy shipment, harmless, but rigged to trace and record every step. I would report another boat theft, same pattern as before, and let her come for it. Only this time, it would be staged. She'd walk into a setup without ever realizing she was sinking herself. But to bait the hook, I needed to make the theft irresistible. So I posted on my own account about restoring the Salty Betty, even teased a new sonar system worth thousands. I talked loudly on the phone outside, where she could hear, mentioned how the dock camera had been acting up and how I'd be away that weekend fishing inland. By the time Friday night rolled around, the boat sat there glowing like a trap, loaded and ready. Karen passed by that evening, walking her dog or pretending to. She slowed down just enough to peek through the fence. The bait had been noticed. All I had to do now was wait and let her hang herself with her own anchor rope. And if she didn't bite, well, I had backup plans for backup plans, because if there's one thing I've learned after 30 years on the water, it's that crooks and currents always run the same way. You just have to chart their path, stay steady, and be ready to strike when the tide turns. Karen took the bait faster than I expected. By Saturday morning, my dock camera caught her sneaking out just after dawn, not in her usual HOA queen outfit, but dressed like someone trying to look like they belonged on a dock crew, ball cap, windbreaker, even gloves. It might have been comical if I hadn't known exactly what she was trying to do. She walked straight down the slope, checked over her shoulder once, and climbed aboard the Salty Betty like she owned it. She didn't hesitate. She started the engine, untied the lines, and eased the boat away with surprising skill for someone who just a few weeks ago couldn't tell the difference between port and starboard. The FBI surveillance team was already in place, stationed in an unmarked boat half a mile out and a drone overhead keeping a live feed. I stayed inside, watching everything unfold on my screen in near silence. My fingers gripped around a coffee mug I'd forgotten to drink from. This wasn't just about catching a thief anymore, it was about shutting down whatever Karen was tangled up in before she dragged someone else's life into her chaos. She took the boat out beyond the cove, heading for open water. The FBI followed at a distance. The decoy cargo on board was a sealed crate fitted with a hidden tracking device, audio recorders, and what looked like a legitimate manifest listing fishing gear and sonar tech. She had no idea that she was now part of a federal operation, No clue that her every word was being recorded and that somewhere on the other end agents were listening in with headphones, jotting down her every lie. The rendezvous point was an isolated inlet near the old sea cliffs, a spot I remembered from my Coast Guard days as a popular drop zone for smugglers who didn't want to be seen. According to the plan, an undercover agent would approach as the buyer, exchange a fake payment, and gather enough evidence for a direct arrest. The goal was clean. No dramatics. No room for her to talk her way out. But when has anything involving Karen ever gone as planned? She reached the spot early. The agent posing as the buyer was just arriving when another boat appeared out of nowhere, cutting across the inlet like a shadow. It was the same black hole vessel I had seen behind the yacht club, the one with the taped-over nameplate. It hadn't been cleared for this part of the operation. That meant it wasn't law enforcement. It was one of hers, or worse, someone above her. Karen looked confused at first. She waved, trying to signal the mystery boat, but they didn't respond. Instead, they circled slowly, almost like they were checking her out. Then one of the men on board shouted something and tossed a rope, demanding she tie off. Karen panicked. You could see it in her body language. She stalled, backed up, then tried to flee, but she wasn't fast enough. The black boat rammed her side, just hard enough to jolt her, not to sink the vessel, but to send a message. Two men jumped aboard. One of them opened the crate and immediately realized it was a fake. Karen started yelling. She was pointing at the other boat, trying to explain something. It was chaos. I leaned in closer to the screen, heart racing. This wasn't part of the plan. This was going sideways fast. Luckily, the drone footage gave the FBI the confirmation they needed. Within seconds, two more boats closed in from different angles, flashing lights now visible from shore. Karen dropped to her knees on the deck with her hands up, a move that was equal parts dramatic and self-preserving. The men from the black boat tried to escape, but the agents boxed them in. The arrest happened fast, efficient, like a net tightening around a school of fish. By the time it was over, both boats were secured, 3 suspects in cuffs, and Karen sobbing like she'd just been personally betrayed by the ocean itself. From my end, watching all this from the safety of my living room, I didn't feel triumph, not yet. What I felt was something heavier, the kind of cold satisfaction that comes when justice finally catches up, but the damage has already been done. My boat was recovered, sure, but it had been defaced, used, tainted by whatever Karen had pulled into my life, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to take it out again. Without thinking about this morning, about the way her fingers curled around the wheel like it belonged to her. Later that day, the FBI visited in person. They asked me to come down to the station, give a formal statement, and help identify some of the items they found. One of the agents told me privately that the sting had revealed far more than they expected. Karen had ties to a small but active ring involved in laundering crypto via maritime shipments, masking electronics inside recreational gear. She wasn't the boss, but she was a trusted link. She made it look legitimate, used her HOA role to shield her dock activity, even bribed a few contractors to keep quiet about permits and deliveries. The scale of it left me stunned. All this, and she still had time to write people up for lawn gnomes and unapproved porch paint. By the time I got home that evening, the neighborhood was already buzzing. News travels fast in small communities, especially when it involves someone like Karen. Her house was locked down. FBI agents were seen carrying out boxes. Neighbors stood at their porches, whispering, pretending not to watch. Someone left a plastic flamingo with police caution tape tied around its neck on her front lawn. I didn't laugh, not yet, but I appreciated the irony. That night, I stood at the dock where it all began, watching the water move gently under the moonlight. The Salty Betty floated quietly in her rightful place, patched up, evidence bag removed, stripped of that awful pink paint. I touched the rail, felt the slight dent still there, and took a long breath. This wasn't over. There'd be court hearings, maybe even media. attention, but the storm had passed for now, and Karen, for all her bluff and bravado, had finally met a tide she couldn't outrun. Still, I couldn't help but feel like something deeper had been stirred. She wasn't just a crazy neighbor, she was a symptom of something bigger, entitlement mixed with ego and a little bit of opportunity. People like that don't just vanish, they adapt. They crawl back in new ways. I didn't know what her next move would be, or if she'd even get one, but I'd be ready, and this time, I wouldn't wait for her to steal something. To set things right. I'd be the storm before she ever saw it coming. They say revenge is best served cold, but watching Karen get hauled off in handcuffs under the hot morning sun had a certain satisfying warmth to it. The docks were buzzing for days after. The HOA board scrambled to distance themselves from her, pretending they had no idea what she was up to. Some even tried to claim she had manipulated them with fake documents and forged votes. I didn't argue. Let them sort out their guilt in private. I had a bigger job to do now. The FBI wanted help, tracing everything she'd touched in that marina, and I was the only one who understood every inch of that water like the back of my hand. Over the next few days, I worked alongside the agents. Not officially, of course, I wasn't back in uniform, but my advice carried weight. I told them where she used to idle for long stretches without reason, which docks had gone quiet around the time of her drop-offs, and which neighbors had suddenly gotten a little too rich, too fast. We walked shorelines, checked old cameras, followed up on names she scribbled in her little green notebook that had been found during the search of her house. What we discovered surprised even the agents. Karen wasn't working alone. She was part of a small, tight-knit group of local enablers, a landscaper who helped her stash crates under compost bins, a boat mechanic who installed secret compartments in hulls without asking questions, even a retired tax consultant who helped launder incoming payments through a fake HOA improvement fund. She had built a low-level criminal empire hidden behind rose bushes and HOA bylaws, and no one had noticed because they were too busy worrying about mailbox heights and porch decor. One morning, I was standing near the dock reviewing footage with an agent when a sleek black SUV pulled up. Out stepped a sharply dressed woman who looked more suited for a courtroom than a marina. She introduced herself as a federal prosecutor and asked if I would be willing to testify when the time came. I said yes without hesitation. I didn't just want Karen to get jail time, I wanted her entire network exposed. This wasn't just about my boat anymore, it was about how close evil had been to our doorsteps while we were all looking the other way. The case moved quickly. The FBI had more than enough evidence, thanks to the sting and Karen's own arrogance. She had written everything down like she was running a business, not a criminal operation. Payment logs, drop schedules, boat maintenance reports, even a folder labeled expansion plans that detailed a vision to start a second location in a different state. I couldn't help but shake my head at the absurdity of it. She wasn't just entitled, she was ambitious. When news broke of her arrest and charges, the town split into two camps. One half was shocked and embarrassed, the other half was quietly smug, finally validated in every bad feeling they ever had about her. I got phone calls from people I hadn't spoken to in years, all of them wanting to know the details. I kept it simple. Told them she got caught doing the wrong thing to the wrong person, and that was the truth. If she'd stolen anyone else's boat, she might have gotten away with it, but she picked the one guy who used to hunt pirates for a living. Still, I wasn't content to sit back and watch the legal system take over. I wanted to make sure the damage she caused didn't ripple out to people who didn't deserve it. I started attending HOA meetings, not as a member, but as a concerned neighbor. I brought copies of the property maps, showed people where their land ended and HOA control began. I educated them on their rights. It was amazing how many people didn't even know they could opt out of certain policies if their deeds were worded a certain way. Karen had ruled with fear and confusion. I was going to fix that. One evening, a young couple knocked on my door. They had just moved in a few months ago and were worried about a fine Karen had issued right before her arrest, something about using the wrong brand of mulch. They showed me the letter. I laughed out loud when I saw the HOA header was misspelled. She had been sending out fake citations using her own stationery. I told them to frame it as a souvenir. They left smiling, and I realized, for the first time in a while, that the neighborhood was starting to feel normal again. As for the Salty Betty, she had seen better days. The pink paint was finally gone, but the scars remained. Scratches, dents, wiring damage from whatever Karen's people had tampered with. The FBI offered to cover repairs using funds seized from her account. I accepted, not because I couldn't afford it, but because it felt right that her money would be used to restore what she tried to destroy. The boat shop did a fine job, even upgraded her electronics and added a fresh sonar suite. When I took her out for the first ride since the sting, she hummed like she used to, clean, steady, mine. I didn't go far, just out into the middle of the cove where the water was calm and the sun caught the surface like glass. I sat there in silence, listening to the creak of the hull and the splash of a lazy fish beneath it. It felt like closure, the kind you only get when the storm has passed and all the wreckage has been cleared away. I looked toward Karen's empty dock. Her flamingo lawn ornaments were gone. Her porch looked abandoned, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just a quiet peace, like something had been restored to its rightful balance. But I wasn't naive. People like Karen don't disappear forever. They find new towns, new games, new neighbors to trick. Maybe she'd move somewhere else and try again. Maybe she'd disappear into some cushy plea deal. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd finally learn something behind those prison walls. Either way, I'd done my part. I'd stood my ground. I'd taken the hit, struck back, and cleaned up the mess, and in doing so, I reminded an entire community that rules only matter when they're backed by truth, not by tyrants in tennis shoes. I pulled the throttle gently, turned the bow toward home, and let the wind carry me back to the dock. There were still stories to tell, still neighbors to help, and still work to be done, but for now I was content to glide along the surface, knowing full well that the depths below had already been stirred. Some stories end with a bang, others with a whisper. Mine ended with a steady hum of a boat engine as I pulled back into my slip, the dock gently creaking beneath my boots. As I tied off the lines, the Salty Betty looked as proud as ever, clean and restored, but something about her felt different now. Not worse, just wiser, like she had gone through something with me and come out tougher on the other side. The scars were still there, but they told a story now, not just of theft and betrayal, but of resilience and quiet revenge. And sometimes, that's the best kind of justice. The neighborhood had settled back into a rhythm. The porch lights were back on, the kids rode their bikes. Without dodging clipboard-carrying HOA board members, and the local newsletter had gone from issuing citations to advertising bake sales and charity car washes. Karen's name was never mentioned anymore, not publicly. Her house sat empty, the grass getting a little longer each week, the paint beginning to peel on her perfectly color-matched fence. I heard through one of the agents that she had accepted a plea deal, some jail time, some fines, and a strict no-contact clause with anyone from our area. She would never set foot on our streets again. That was enough for me. But justice has a funny way of rippling out. About a month after the sting, I got a call from a lawyer representing one of the HOA members who had been part of Karen's inner circle. He wanted to meet. I agreed, mostly out of curiosity. We met at a small diner near the marina. The man was nervous, fidgeting with a napkin and barely touching his coffee. He told me he'd only joined her scheme because she convinced him it was harmless, said it was just gray area stuff, creative financing, community reinvestment, she had called it. But when he realized it involved real contraband and possible federal charges, he panicked. He was cooperating now, helping authorities trace the money trail and turn over every document he could find. He wanted to apologize, not just legally, personally. I listened. I let him talk. Then I told him something I didn't expect myself to say. I told him I forgave him because holding on to hate is like dragging an anchor through shallow water. It slows you down, scrapes everything around you, and eventually it damages the very boat you're trying to protect. He didn't cry, but his eyes got glassy. He paid for our coffee and left quietly. I never saw him again. Back at home, I started doing something I hadn't done in a long time. I wrote. Not formal reports or statements, but memories. I started writing down the story of the Salty Betty, how she came to be, what she meant to my wife, and everything she had survived. I didn't know if I'd publish it or just leave it in a drawer, but it felt good to put it into words, like sealing a chapter with ink instead of anger, like carving meaning into wood. Neighbors started visiting more often. Some brought pies, others brought questions. Everyone wanted to know how I had kept so calm through the madness. I told them the truth. I said I'd seen worse on open seas and rougher storms in my own life, but mostly, I just didn't want to let someone like Karen dictate how I lived or felt. That kind of power only works when you let it, and I had taken mine back the moment I stopped reacting and started recording. One day, I found a small package in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a wooden plaque, beautifully carved with the words "The Captain of Calm" engraved on it. No signature, just those 4 words. I smiled and hung it on the wall in the boathouse, right next to an old photo of me and my wife holding up a striped vase we caught off the coast of Maine. She used to joke that I could talk a storm out of raining if I just stared hard enough at the sky. Maybe she was right. The FBI eventually closed the case. The network Karen had helped operate was dismantled, her assets were liquidated, her license plates revoked, and her reputation effectively erased. But the story lived on in the community, not as gossip, but as a reminder that one person, no matter how loud or powerful they seem, cannot bend truth forever. That sometimes the quietest people carry the sharpest tools, and that the water always remembers. On the first calm Saturday of spring, I hosted a small gathering at my dock. Nothing fancy, just grilled fish, cold drinks, and a few neighbors who had stood by me through the worst of it. We laughed, we swapped stories. One of them asked if I'd ever thought about running for HOA president now that the position was wide open. I nearly choked on my drink. I told them I'd rather wrestle a gator than sort through lawn regulations and holiday decor arguments. We all agreed it was better that way. I was a watcher, not a ruler. As the sun dipped low and the water turned gold, I sat at the edge of the dock, feet dangling over the side, the Salty Betty rocking gently at her post. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for anything. Not a call, not a knock, not a storm, just silence, just peace, and maybe that's the best revenge of all. Not slamming doors or courtrooms or even public disgrace, but outliving the chaos, outlasting it, watching it fade into the horizon like a bad weather system finally breaking apart over distant waves. And as the laughter faded and the neighbors headed home, I stayed behind a little longer, just me, the boat, and the open sky above. I thought about everything Karen had tried to take, my peace, my property, my pride, and I realized she hadn't taken a single thing that mattered, because what mattered most wasn't the boat or the dock or even the wind. It was knowing that I had stood firm, without rage, without panic, and let the truth do the work. That I had held the line. The tide rolled in slow, brushing the pilings with a soft rhythm, and I leaned back on my elbows, smiling to myself. The world would keep turning. There would be new neighbors, new nonsense, new storms, but for now, the water was still, and in that stillness, I found everything I needed. Not justice from a court, but justice from the sea itself, quiet, endless, and patiently watching.